Thank you, everyone, for joining us, everyone, today. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar. Are you ready for the 2026 ADA Accessibility Rules, a guide for community media? My name is Matt Landry, and as a member of the MassAccess board, I'm thrilled to serve as your kind of moderator, quiet moderator today. Before we dive into our discussion, I wanted to extend a sincere thank you to all of our MassAccess members. Thank you very much for being a member and for being here today. And also a thank you and recognition to our Alliance for Community Media members who are joining us today as well. Thank you so much for being here. Your dedication to community media is what makes these educational sessions so vital, and we are grateful for your continued support as we navigate these important regulatory shifts together. I also want to give a special thank you to Telview and Jesse Lerman for sponsoring this webinar. Before we really get started, just a couple of dates to put on your radar for our MassAccess folks. We have several virtual member meetups scheduled for April 24th, May 29th, and June 26th. And also on May 6th, 10 a.m., we will be having a meet and greet at the State House in Boston featuring a legislative briefing, followed by an in-person meet and greet in June 12th in Taunton at TCAM TV. Today's webinar is specifically designed to provide a clear overview of the upcoming ADA requirements, including captioning, audio description, and WCAG, to ensure our organizations are fully prepared for compliance. There's a Q&A that's available for you to use. And I'm going to post a link in the chat that you can use to register for the May 6th State House meetup. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jesse. Oh, before I do that, let me actually introduce people. Sorry, I kind of jumped right ahead. We have a wonderful panel here today. First, I'd like to introduce Mike Wassenaar, who is president and CEO of the Alliance for Community Media, where he supports and advocates for public, educational, and government access television nationwide. He frequently leads seminars on community media and has presented before Congress, the FCC, and national industry organizations. Previously, he served 13 years as executive director of St. Paul Neighborhood Network and helped lead a digital literacy AmeriCorps initiative. With over 30 years in community media and public radio, Mike began his career in youth media and went on to produce and host programs with stations including KFAI, WORT, and Wisconsin Public Radio. Thank you, Mike, for being here. Matt Schuster is the executive director of Public Media Network in Kalamazoo, where he has led efforts to roll out new accessibility solutions for viewers and the community, and brings over 20 years of experience in community media. He previously led organizations including TV Santa Barbara and Louisville Metro Government's Metro TV, earning multiple awards for excellence in government programming. His background also includes managing government media operations and cable policy in Illinois and Michigan. Matt received the ACM National Buskey Leadership Award in 2013 and has served in leadership roles on both regional and national ACM boards. Thank you, Matt, for being here. And Jesse Lerman is CEO of Telview Corporation, an employee-owned broadcast and cloud video technology company serving community media, cable, and streaming channels. Telview helps broadcasters automate channels, workflows, expand reach, monetize content, and improve accessibility across audio description, closed, open, in-room web captioning. Lerman joined Telview through its acquisition of the Princeton Server Group, which he co-founded, and previously led software development at VOD pioneer Diva Systems. He holds 8 US patents. And now I'm going to hand it over to Jesse. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Matt. And the good news is I'm going to quickly hand it over to Mike, who's going to kick things off here. So Mike, thanks again for joining us today. And thanks for kicking it off.
No worries, Jesse. Thank you very much for the opportunity, everybody. It's good to be with you here. In early April, I know a lot of people are a little freaked out about deadlines coming up. My major message to tell you is not to freak out, but to take action and assess what you need to be doing to be helping your community. We'll talk a little bit about that during the presentation that I've got for you here. So for the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to talk a little bit about how captioning and accessibility rules are at the federal level affect PEG channels and community media operations across the United States, and talk a little bit about the deadline that has been imposed by the Department of Justice with their rules that were promulgated 2 years ago now on standards for accessibility. And I'll have some tips for you to be thinking about as you're making your way with your work, whether you're one of the larger communities or the smaller communities affected by the Department of Justice ruling. So let me go ahead and share a slide deck for you. The slides will be available, I think, for everybody after the fact as well. So, and they have links specifically to documents that I refer to in the course of the presentation. So let me see if I can share this for you here. So basically, and I'm just going to put this into slide. Here we go. Slideshow. Let's start this out. We'll talk about basically the accessibility rules that you should be thinking about for your PEG channels. The rules themselves fall under two sets of federal rules that I think are important to note because people get confused about them. There's a series of FCC captioning rules which affect all television channels in the United States. They include the cable channels on every cable system, but all broadcast channels for television have these captioning rules, and they've been in effect since 1998. And actually, we've been affected by them, even though there's some exceptions and exemptions to those rules. And then there are the ADA rules, which are administered by the Department of Justice. Those pertain not to captioning or to PEG channels, but to all organizations and businesses in the United States. Both sets of rules actually have been in place since the 1990s. It's just with changing technology, changing needs, and changing administrations, we have different applications of those rules. So that's really what we're dealing with here. But it's important to distinguish between the FCC and the ADA administration a little bit because people sometimes confuse the two and talk about, for example, the FCC administering the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is not the case. So let's start off with the FCC rules. Even though these are simpler in some respects, they're important to keep in mind. All television channels must be captioned in the United States, and the captions actually must have specific standards. And those are in the FCC rules for captioning television. They actually, in that link, they've been there for quite some time. There's actually a series of battles that the broadcast industry has over those captioning standards. The thing about PEG channels generally is that community television falls under a series of self-implementing exemptions for certain programs or organizations under those captioning rules. They're listed there on that link that I'm sharing with you. But generally, the exemptions are for all channels that have less than $3 million in revenue or any channel that has captioning costs which exceed 2% of their gross revenues. And our calculation is that's most all community television operations in the United States. The other captioning rules that you should be aware of, I think, as well, is that all online video must be captioned since 2011. In 2011, Congress passed the 21st Century Communications and Video Act, which states that all online only video has to have captioning. The major exception to this is for any video that is exempt per the FCC captioning rules. Therefore, if you're running video on your cable channel and then also streaming it or putting it onto a web application, the exemption that exists for your cable channel extends out to online video distribution as an exempt entity. That said, if you're just providing video only on an app or just providing video only in an online environment, that exemption doesn't exist. So this is something that's important to be thinking about, particularly as people are thinking about different multi-channel applications. And then also if these exemption rules change over time, they would be affecting the application specifically for what would be an exempt video environment. So we can talk a little bit about that later on in Q&A. As well, there's a number of reporting rules that we've been working with the FCC on over the course of a long period of time. Unfortunately, this FCC is not particularly, I think, interested in some of its own rulemaking, believe it or not. The thing I think is important to note is that the rules were established in 1998 for captioning. And those exemptions were established at the same time. They're based upon the cost of captioning in 1998, which is radically different from what it exists now in 2026. And even the pace of change has accelerated for the cost of captioning, going down and down and down each and every year and actually month over month. So I would not imagine that those exemption levels stay the same. And we should just keep that in note as we're moving forward. I've seen some people talk about the ADA regulations and say, "Oh, well, I don't have to worry about this because I don't want to distribute on non-cable platforms." You should be concerned about just generally how you should be reaching your community with, I think, as many adaptive technologies as possible. I think that's a philosophical thing. I know that Matt will be talking about a little bit later on. It's really about how you're helping people with the technology that's available, but you should be noting that these rules will probably change over time as costs change and technology changes. The major deadlines that I think a lot of people are talking about have to do with the implementation of quality standards for the ADA. The Department of Justice actually put forward those rules in the Federal Register in April of 2024. And actually, they had a decades-long process of actually talking about those rules. Actually, that goes back to the first Obama administration. The rules address the quality of online and application-based communications and the ability for individuals with disabilities to actually engage with that media and help them improve their civic activity, improve their lives as sort of the responsibility of all local and state governments. The rules specifically cover local and state governments in the United States, so-called Title II entities under the ADA. You'll sometimes see this referred to by some companies as Title II deadlines coming up. So that's why they're called Title II deadlines in some people's materials. It covers all local and state government, online communication, and app-based communication. The rules outline, how ADA can best be achieved. They don't change responsibilities or rights that local and state governments have under ADA, and I think that's extremely important to note. And I think it's an element that gets lost in the entire discussion. A key factor in ADA is whether or not your organization or local government or state government effectively communicates with individuals who have disabilities. And that effective communication standard is still a part of ADA, has not been changed by these quality standards. We'll talk a little bit about the importance about that in a moment or two. The rules require a specific quality standard that's been recognized internationally by the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which are put together by the W3 Consortium, that actually meets on a yearly basis to look over guidelines for quality standards for web communication. The level itself that is specified for local and state governments is that level 2.1, level AA. We'll talk about what that means in just a moment. Actually, 2.2 has already been published. Right now, standards 3.0 are being drafted by the W3C consortium. The different standards recognize different levels of accessibility and achievement of accessibility. I'll talk about that in a moment. There's actually a link to the adopted version of the rule. They specifically aren't about captioning. They reference ways in which local and state governments can meet accessibility standards for all online and app-based communication for different forms of disability. And that could be visual acuity, it could be cognitive disabilities, it could be dexterity. So actually, we're talking about a range of different applications in terms of online content. So for example, contrast of visual materials, alternate text, all come up as possible scenarios within those standards. The version that actually the DOJ adopted was written by the International Standards Committee in 2018, so it's not a new standard by any means. And it's not the most cutting edge standard, even though it does actually represent some technical challenges in our field that I know Jesse will be talking about a little bit later on. These are just sort of standards that the principles of the standards themselves, that basically the communication that we give has to be perceivable, that the tools have to be operable by people with disabilities, they have to be understandable by people with disabilities, and the tools have to be robust, meaning that they have the ability to be able to work over time with many different people. The guidelines that the DOJ adopted were really a middle standard, that level AA. They're not the highest standard and they're not the lowest standard of success for all of those principles. So they adopted, I think, in some respects, a middle road approach to these quality standards. Specifically, how this applies to all of us, well, the standards require alternatives to time-based media, to video particularly, and audio tracks for video. So under different success criteria for the standards, live captioning has to be provided for all live audio content that occurs in synchronized media, video, with audio content, right? And then I think the most challenging technical aspect that we have to be thinking about, and I know Jesse will talk about this a little bit later on, will be audio description for pre-recorded content, not for live content. So audio description has to be provided for all pre-recorded video content in synchronized media with these standards. Let's talk a little bit about the effective communication standard. This, I think, gets lost in some of the marketing material that we see from different companies. The effective communication standard really is at the core of ADA, and it says that all Title II entities have a responsibility to communicate with disabled individuals in a means that individuals determine themselves. So I think the most important thing to be noting to everybody in the room here today is that we may adopt captioning for our channels, but if you have a request for like live meeting coverage where someone wants accommodation for American Sign Language and a sign interpreter, live captioning doesn't obviate that need. And you still have to respond to that request for reasonable accommodation. So I think it's a framework you need to be thinking about as we're moving forward here with our work together. We have to be thinking about reasonably accommodating people and really making sure that our organizations and local government is noting that it is open to that responsiveness. And I'll talk a little bit about this a little bit later. If the accommodation that's requested is an undue burden to the local government entity, basically there's not a mechanism under ADA which will force the Title II entity to do that accommodation. Okay, so if a service is fundamentally altered, or if there's an undue financial burden on the local government based on the accommodations that are requested, responsible parties in local government have to state publicly why the service cannot be provided. All right, that still is in ADA, and it's something to be thinking about as you're talking with your government partners or with other folks within local government if you're part of local government. Two deadlines were put forward for implementation for all online communication. This would be for all websites, app-based communication. For communities with over 50,000 residents, there was a two-year compliance deadline put forward. So the deadline for compliance is April 24th, 2026. It's really at the end of this month. If your community is under 50,000 residents, you had 3 years to comply with all online and app-based communication change, and that would be next April 24th, 2027. This applies to all units of government at both the state and local level, and to the contractors that provide government services to the public. This is an important note, is that courts have recognized that a local government or state or federal government cannot get rid of their obligations under ADA by contracting services out to a nonprofit or to a for-profit entity. It's a government communication, a government service, and that responsibility still pertains. So I think that's something we have to be thinking about, particularly if you're a nonprofit entity that's serving one or more local units of government. The DOJ expects all entities to audit and revise their services in these terms and actually work to certify that their apps and websites work appropriately, and that you actually work with vendors that understand these rules and regulations. I think it's very, very important to recognize as you're having conversations with service providers. And I think I'll get to that in sort of the tips in a moment or two. And then the other thing I think is important for us to note is that ADA is enforced by really two mechanisms. One, it's enforced by the Federal Department of Justice and also by individuals who can sue for relief in court. So that means that the Department of Justice can change its civil rights division. It can change its priorities from administration to administration. But that right for individuals to seek relief endures. And that means that, particularly, I think, in this administration, we may not see a robust auditing of civil rights requirements for local governments by this Justice Department, but the potential for liability for local government will remain if you don't act and you don't plan appropriately. So my recommendation is you need to act and plan and work with your partners to act and plan. So here's some key tips and takeaways that I want to give to you as you're thinking about the sort of like the overall task. You want to assess and listen to the needs of your community. That's at the core of ADA. I think it's at the core of our mission as well, to provide communications resources so that communities can understand one another, that they can be civically engaged. I don't think it's that alien for most of us to do that, but it may be a little alien for some of our partners to do that. So I think you just need to be framing the work that we're doing not as about a technical implementation alone, but about assessing and listening to the needs of the community. Local governments, particularly, need to communicate to the public their commitment to reasonably accommodate individuals who have disabilities. If a local government does not have that publicly stated regularly, they I think are at some risk for liability. And we've seen some cases where basically people with disabilities have been super frustrated to actually get sort of basic needs met by local governments, and the local governments had no mechanism by which people could engage. So you need to have engagement mechanisms, and it's a positive responsibility to say that you will reasonably accommodate people's needs. You should have a plan for online communications and time-based media that complies with the rules. It means that if you, for example, are in a community under 50,000 people, probably need to be compiling those plans for implementation by April 2027. You need to determine if the plan is burdensome or not. And by burdensome, I mean burdensome to local government as a whole. This is actually a question that has come up specifically with some departments which have small budgets. It's the responsibility of the overall government entity. It's not the responsibility of the individual department budget. So the economic burden would be, say, for example, an entire county rather than a county department. So that has to be determined in the budgeting process. And I think for a lot of us, that means that we have to be communicating this issue early on for any type of work we're doing with local and county government. We need to communicate these issues with decision makers at the local level within local government because it's their responsibility. And we need to be working with vendors that are familiar with these standards and that use products that conform with the WCAG standards. This is actually something that I've been working with a number of our vendor partners across the country on over the course of the last 2 or 3 years now, is to help them understand those standards. And in some cases, it's been community media organizations like yours that are the first organizations that mention to local government that these issues are real. So you shouldn't be thinking about this as a burden. I think you all can be heroes in this situation for folks in your community. You need to regularly make a real assessment of costs for providing accommodations like captioning and audio description. I think that means doing an economic assessment, probably at least on a 1 to 2 year basis, and actually revising that plan regularly to see within your workflow what it would mean to be able to do these types of services. And then I think the last thing you should be doing is once you know what those costs look like, you should be seeking financial resources and partners to be implementing those costs. We see this with sponsorship packages sometimes in local media. Very often, granting programs occur within local government or within state agencies that are concerned with disability access. I think there's an opportunity to be extending your technical resources to people in your community after you've made those assessments. So those are all kind of some suggestions I want to pass on for you guys to think about during the course of our conversation today. And then I've got my contact information there for you if you want to reach out to me directly. So I know that's a lot. We'll have a lot of opportunity to talk about this. So let me kind of hand it back to Jesse.
Great. Thanks so much, Mike. This is probably a good point, I think, to see if there's some questions on everything you've covered on the regulatory side. So, want to, I don't know, Matt,
Yeah,
if you're monitoring, that'd be great.
I am. Yeah, there's actually two questions I have that were posed. One, which I think you covered a little bit, Mike, but are you able to clarify whether purely public access channels are required to comply with the Title II guidelines, or if that requirement applies only to government entities and full PEG channels?
So, I think the thing that's important to note is you're a nonprofit. You have to comply with ADA in the first place. So I think what that means is you need to be assessing how to make accommodations if accommodations are requested of you. You should be doing that anyway. Um, so that's, I think, the first thing to be thinking about. The access channels themselves only specifically pertain to the Title II requirements if you are providing government communications on your channel, or say, for example, there's a channel that's designated specifically as a G channel. We see this commonly across the United States. And then also the material that is being distributed out on an app, multi-channel platforms, online environments. I've had some questions coming back as to whether or not, as a local government, you could exempt yourself by simply not doing captioning at all in any online situation, just simply only do working cable. And I think that's kind of like a cutting off your nose to spite your face type of solution. And uh, it won't prevent changes occurring with the FCC rules, certainly. So, I just think it's in everyone's best interest to be scoping this out, particularly if you do any type of government communications work or partnership with government communications work. I see this other question, Jonathan, too, about repercussions for not complying aside from possible litigation, fines, legal costs. Those are all possible. And we've actually seen that in court cases against local governments as well as nonprofits. So, I think if you should show due diligence in any type of litigation, it's helpful. So that means actually making a plan is actually in your best interest as a factor, especially if you determine that it costs too much to be able to implement a certain type of solution, right? And then Scott's got a question about if there's a determination as to what and how much is an undue burden. The answer is no. It's a subjective test. So here's like a thing I would tell you. If it's like a $50,000 cost for a $50,000 program or budget, sure, that seems like an undue burden. If it's a $50,000 project for a $2 billion budget that a county may have, probably not. But again, it's probabilistic. It's subjective. There isn't like a slide rule that says that this is no, $1 more as an undue burden, right? So I think this is just something that has to kind of pass the smell test as you look at sort of the overall totality of a budget, particularly a local government budget, right? So let's say in your department, you're looking at an implementation cost for communications work. The burden has to be a burden on the county or the city, all right? So that's just the other way to be thinking about this.
Great. Were there any other questions? Okay. Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Mike. I will fire up some slides here as well. Let me just share my screen. And okay, hopefully everyone can see my slides here. So I'm going to pivot and talk more about the technology and workflow side of things. And then when I pass it on to Matt Schuster, he'll cover, more practical and real world experience at Public Media Network. So before diving into the tech and workflow, I did have some additional frequently asked questions that tend to come up on the regulatory side, just from some of the other, similar sessions I've been involved with. So I may ask Mike to help me answer some of these as well, because some of these get into some pretty gray areas. So one that often comes up where their wording says audio description is required for pre-recorded content. So this is an interesting one is, okay, what about your cable and streaming channels where you're scheduling programming and you may schedule at some time of the day, you have a live program that's running during that time. And then another, after the live program, you're scheduling something that is technically pre-recorded, but it's part of a live channel. So what's the deal with that? So I'll give my quick take, Mike, and you let me know
Okay.
if you agree.
I'm
I
not
think
a
it's
lawyer, but okay, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that's a fair
Yeah.
a fair point. No one on the panel right now are lawyers, so you have to take everything we say into consideration, knowing that. But I think it's probably fair to say the spirit of it is that live channel. It is a live channel, even though it has that other content, and you probably don't need to worry about that.
I believe
Maybe
that's correct.
down,
I
yeah.
believe that's correct. The problem you would have if you play back that channel on in a pre-recorded basis or loop it afterwards.
Yeah, maybe something like exactly.
Right.
So it's a fine line
Yeah.
between, what is on demand, what is live. Now, interesting if this did come up as an issue, who knows whether there's some clever tips like, you know what, I'm always going to have live, real-time news and a clock and weather on the channel. And now I'm saying, look, the information on the screen is actually, real time and live. Maybe you get out of the whole thing that way. But I think for now, it's probably fair to say, especially on the audio description side, you're focusing more on the on-demand, side of things, particularly streaming. So another one I've heard come up is, does bulletin board require closed captioning or audio description? And I feel like that's probably in a pretty similar boat. In most cases, bulletin board is incorporated into your live channels, and I would put it in the same type of category.
Jesse, I'll say when I worked at the city of Louisville, we did have to do a version based on community requests that had audio of any bulletin board that we had. So we had a phone service at that time that people could
I,
call into, and we had recorded voiceover of what was on every slide.
Interesting, and that
and
probably
I think Matt's approach is correct. Description is correct. Is it thinking about a reasonable accommodation for someone with like a low visual acuity, right? So yeah,
And that was more basically on request. So, I mean, that is a fair point. Even these, things we say, well, what happens if someone says, hey, I'm watching your linear channel, and how come when this show is running, I'm not able to get audio description? I'd like to make a request for that. So then at that point, it kind of falls into that effective communication and, it has to be explored. So, these things could come up, and that does make it a little trickier. So yeah, thanks, Matt. So then another one would be, what about all of my videos in social media from before the deadline, right? You may have
they're
a
all
massive
exempt.
library.
They're all exempt.
So the only, Mike, I want to run this by you. I did some prior, detailed reading, and the one thing I came across is, but on the archive, effectively everything predated. What I read is it is important that it is clearly designated as an archive. That if you, and this, becomes something to think about the way you're presenting your content. If you just lump it all together, it actually could get pulled in because it's like, hey, you're not distinguishing that this is part of the archive.
That's right. I
Yeah.
think that's an important distinction, Jesse.
Yeah. And then another one we've heard come up is if I post to you, hey, I post all my videos on YouTube. I don't even have a VOD portal on my, on my website. I don't have to worry about this, right? And the answer there is wrong, because it's not where you're posting, it's who you are, basically. So that doesn't
That's
exempt you.
that's correct. And I think the question I would have would be whether or not YouTube is changing their services as standards move forward.
Yeah, I'll touch a little bit on that as well. And then another one, and I think Mike did kind of, cover this, is, if I'm a nonprofit, but I also post government meetings, do I need audio description for, just the meetings or all of my program? And I think the answer there would be just for the meetings in that case.
And,
Doesn't
and,
necessarily, yeah.
and further, what I would do though, is to if I wanted to have a belts and suspenders solution, is spec out what the cost of that it would be for your content that you produce. Because if ever there's a question that comes up about your nonprofit accommodating needs, you've got a sense of what that cost looks like. And it's not that hard to get two separate quotes.
Yeah, that's a
And
great
I
point.
can I'll talk about it in my presentation too, but we've taken a different approach than your answer here for what we feel.
Great. All right. Looking forward to hearing that, Matt. And then another one would be if I'm a nonprofit, but I post VOD on my town's government website. Like I never, bothered creating my own site, but technically I'm a nonprofit. Do I now need captioning and audio description for all my programming? And my read there is yes. And Mike, I'm curious what you think about that, that because you are now making that available on effectively the government site, and it would then behoove you to get your own site launched quickly.
I think that's probably right, Jesse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a couple
And,
subtle
and,
ones
and
there.
this might also affect what local governments do to accommodate non-governmental communication on their sites,
Yeah.
right? Because suddenly there's this liability shadow that they have, right? So
Yeah.
it's complex and you might see some shakeout, but I think that's correct.
Great. And then I just wanted to, highlight something Mike said earlier, where it's often the case that community media is that first touch point, in, local government to really, even be on top of this and be aware of it at all. And just like, many community media stations are, they're, the experts on video production. So they get involved in, important things like covering government meetings, and that can become a revenue source, right? It's really important showing the value that community media centers have. So while this, on one hand, it's a little scary, there's costs associated, it is interesting to really think about, hopefully this is a key takeaway, is it could be a huge opportunity to increase the value of CMCs and bring in new sources of revenue, being the expert in this area and, helping roll this out across, other, departments and agencies. So I think that's something to think about. Okay, so diving into a little bit on the tech side, obviously not a surprise that AI is a huge part of just about all accessibility tech that we're talking about these days. So just to give some quick terminology, I thought I'd just introduce some terms. So, one key AI technology is speech to text, and that's been out there for quite a while and is really instrumental for captioning. There's some other technologies that can also tap into AI, like diarization, which is speaker detection. Some of that can get really sophisticated. Some solutions out there even allow kind of like a voice fingerprinting, where you could even take a sample of of your council member speaking if they approve, because there's a whole other potential legal side to that. But then some systems will accept those little speaking samples, and then going forward, they can very accurately identify, not just say speaker one, speaker two, or speaker change. They can say this person is now speaking. So that's pretty interesting. Then on the flip side, you have text to speech. And that is really important for audio description, in particular for the narration side. We'll talk a little more about that. Translation, of course, to translate into different languages. You have generative AI, including for gestures and graphics, which is interesting. There's some companies out there that are now doing, text to sign language. So you can have basically AI automated sign language, like in the corner of a live, event or stream. And then, of course, on the audio description side, probably one that is maybe the most complex is all the vision, what they call vision AI. So that is the ability for AI to identify what is going on in images. It's now become what they call multimodal, meaning it's not just looking at, the frames and the images. It may be, listening to the audio as well. So it's taking in multiple input sources. And then there's also good old OCR, which is, detecting, text on the screen, and those all play into audio description. So diving into audio description, we've already talked quite a bit about the requirement, noting that it can be quite expensive for human-based audio description, as much as $15 to $30 a minute. So, that gets into, if that were the only way, might that, trigger a hardship exemption? It might actually, but, we're at a point now where AI is really there. So it'd be hard to, make that claim. And then there are all sorts of, big major companies out there that offer, vision AI solutions. Google Gemini is a big one. Amazon has their recognition and Nova tools, a whole slew of them out there. They're exploding everywhere. OpenAI, Anthropic, they're all, rolling out solutions here. So for the AI-based audio description tools, there's a pretty wide range of pricing out there. That's kind of like Mike mentioned with captioning. I think over time, the expectation is the prices would start to come down over time as well. It's interesting for audio description. So, how is it presented? It can be presented in a number of different ways. So once you now have that, this narration track, how does someone engage that within a video player? And there's a whole bunch of different implementations. And I think Matt may show a couple of examples there. And talking a little bit more about YouTube, which is really interesting. So at the moment, for example, I think most of you are aware, YouTube does have some solutions for automatic captioning built in. So if you're using YouTube, you can have YouTube caption your uploads and even live programming. On the flip side, I'm not aware of YouTube having anything for audio description right now. They do have some solutions where you can, I think it's in YouTube Studio, you can upload additional audio tracks. So if you use some system to create an audio track for audio description, you could then go into YouTube Studio and upload that. I think there was an issue where they did not globally support a way to tag that uploaded audio track specifically as audio description. In my understanding, they've only rolled that out in a beta format, which kind of seems a little funny because it's like another, menu item. It seems like that would be a pretty easy rollout, but obviously it's coming and will be there, but that's something to watch. So, and it is really interesting that at the moment, YouTube's APIs, like if you're a developer or you're developing products and you want to integrate with YouTube, they don't really provide a way via APIs to get an additional audio track uploaded or attached to a specific video you've uploaded. So it kind of puts some burden that if you're doing a lot with YouTube at the moment, you're going to have to probably go into YouTube Studio and do a little manual workflow. Hopefully that changes, but interesting on YouTube. Just, from a tech standpoint, I thought it'd be interesting to show here the simple anatomy of AI audio description, what's actually going on under the hood. And, another important point I don't think we brought up before is with audio description, there's actually two types. There's standard AD and extended AD. And the difference with standard AD, in my understanding, Mike, you could correct me if I'm wrong, I think the WCAG 2.1 AA only requires standard. So I don't think you have a requirement for extended right now, even though extended is, it's a good thing for accessibility, but it is more complex. So standard, what that's all about is the narration fits within gaps in the programming. So when there's a dialogue gap, no one is speaking, that's an opportunity to fit in this narration. Whereas extended, there's no longer, a reason to just look for gaps. You could really add this narration anywhere. And then when someone is engaging with the content, it will pause the programming and allow the narration to speak as long as it wants. So very, very different. There's a lot of low level, tech nuances, but looking at a standard audio description, basically transcription. So the speech to text, just like captioning, is very important to audio description because that allows a very quick analysis to say, hey, where are the dialogue gaps, right? I have this transcript and I see there's a gap here. Okay, cool. That's an opportunity to describe something near there. And I can pass that segment over to Vision AI and say, hey, what's going on here? And describe it. And then I get back text saying, this is what's happening. And then you can send it off to text to speech and it can create the narration. And then there's some other magic. You may have to do some fitting and you do some mixing and boom, you can come out with an audio track. So you kind of see how the audio description side really chains together a lot of the key AI technologies out there. And I mentioned earlier about how to integrate in web players. There's a brute force technique to integrating, which just says, okay, I'm now going to take my audio description and merge that back in with the original video, and I have a whole separate file. I now have two files for everything, one without audio description and one with. And that's kind of a universal way because anything that can accept a file could accept both of them, but obviously very inefficient. You got it, you have higher storage costs, it's just not really the most efficient way to go, but it is a potential solution if platforms don't really allow what would be the next best thing is integrating an external audio track where you say, okay, I've now kicked out a new audio track that has my narration and my audio description. And, this platform offers a way to just upload that audio track. And then a lot of the web video players out there do support track selection, which is nice. And a lot of the OTT apps do as well. This is another reason why extended audio gets a little trickier. That is not like universally supported. There's no universal thing that just says, hey, this is how I represented my extended AD, player, just handle it. It actually requires a lot of custom development to maybe go in and say, oh, you pause here and you keep, you cut over to this audio and then you resume. So it's a lot harder. But you tend to see the extended audio description a little more in web players. That's not to say it can't be integrated in OTT as well. And just real quick on government meetings, obviously they tend to be fairly static in content, but that doesn't mean that audio description isn't really, really important because kind of the standard of measure for someone who's maybe blind or low vision, you should be able to close your eyes and listen to that narration track and be getting really good context. I mean that's the thing. So even though it seems like these government meetings are static, there's a lot of important things going on, a lot of nuance that AD should be covering, including if someone is showing a PowerPoint slide in the middle of a meeting and they don't necessarily speak to everything in the slides, and someone who can see is getting more information. So those are some of the nuances. A lot of the audio description solutions out there do also offer editing. So just like captioning, that's great for, and kind of the way I would, my recommendation here is obviously it would take a lot of time to be going back into all of these files and saying, oh, I'm going to touch up every little thing that AI got wrong. That no one has time for that. Well, almost no one. Some do if you're like a major studio. That's a whole other level. But really handy to have if someone complains. It's there. Someone says, hey, I spotted this and I'd like that fixed. You want a really quick way to do that. That's not going to take a lot of time. So it's nice, even on audio description, just like captioning, there are tools to do a quick edit. Then you can regenerate. It doesn't have to go through the whole AI side at that point. It's really handling just the audio synthesis and boom, you have your updated track. So audio description in social media, pretty interesting here. I mentioned that brute force technique. I've talked a little bit about YouTube, what's going on there. Some of the other social media tools like Instagram Reels, they offer a way to upload a voiceover track. So that can be interesting as well, but it's not like, my take, and I'll admit, I'm not as hands-on with all the social media as probably you all are. So you may even know a lot more about this than I do, but it seems like not many of the social media, apps out there really have like a true, hey, this is, an integrated audio description. They all kind of nibble around it in different ways, and it can get kind of complex. But one thing to think about are different content approaches where, you may limit your content for social media to something where the voiceover track, they may have like an automated voiceover if you're just primarily text-based. Some of them will have, automatic alt text, which is great for screen readers. I think maybe Facebook has some support for that, where if you're just uploading images to social media, it will do the automatic AI, let me see what's in this image and provide it as alt text so someone with a screen reader can read it. So I think it's still developing, and it's, I think it's telling that even YouTube doesn't have this nailed yet, that it's going to be a little bit, kind of just a mishmash out there on the social media side. So pivoting to captioning a bit here, obviously this is a little better understood by everyone because this has been around for quite a while. So I think I'll try to go through this pretty quickly. So, Matt has more time and we have time for questions. But I think one fair takeaway, and of course I may be a little biased here, but it is nice that you see your various playout vendors have long embraced captioning and made it a core part of the playout server, because it's a nice central point to act as a springboard for your captioning and all these other requirements. So it saves a lot on cost if it's integrated. You're not having to buy caption encoders and decoders and mess with all that. So that's become really powerful for CMCs. Some of the fancier features within captioning, you have things like custom vocabulary, which can be great to tune the quality and the accuracy even more, where you can list out your town council members' names and apply that. One thing to look out for workflow, of course, it's nice if you can create these different vocabularies and then even apply them through automation to different programming. So if your automation knows, all right, when these meetings run, I'm using this custom vocabulary. So that can help as well. Some have phonetic support where you can even, this is spoken like, and that also helps with, dealing with things like accents. And we also talked about speaker ID as well. And, captioning is very robust now. You have live captioning with translation to multiple languages is very robust. Particularly on the video on demand side. Often on cable, you may be more limited to, typically two languages if you wanted to do like English and Spanish, whereas on demand, it opens up and you can easily translate to over 100 languages or pick, the handful that are most important to your community and offer those. On the captioning side, even beyond what you're doing on your channels and your on-demand libraries and your streams, another area that's kind of heating up is the idea of captioning for, meeting rooms. So they may call this, in-room captioning or open captioning for spillover rooms, for live meetings. So, it's not just closed captioning. You may be thinking about open captions where it's baked into the video. In-room captions, which is almost like a Star Wars intro-like thing. You take the entire screen real estate and you can show the captions in a live meeting room or event room for accessibility. And then also web captions, where people who are in these meetings or events, or even if they're remote, they can tune in on their own mobile device or tablet and just get a stream of the captions. So this is important for, meetings. If meetings are, open to the public, I think that gets into, as Mike said before, that's like the whole Title III side. Even if you're a nonprofit, you have something open to the public, you need effective communications, probably very likely you'll start to get requests in this area, and that's something to plan for as well. And I mentioned, editing, of course, caption editing, just like audio description. And real quick, other reasons to caption. What's nice is once you have the transcript, it opens up all sorts of cool things you can do. You can make your whole library searchable. So someone's looking for a particular topic, it's now searching against all those transcripts across your entire library, and they can find exactly which videos down to the time code where those topics were spoken. So that's nice for search. Also, it can automatically summarize now once you have those transcripts from the captioning, and that can do things like create chapter points and summaries without having to retype it. So it can be a huge time saver as well. And then a little bit more on WCAG. We've talked a lot about captioning and audio description. There's also the whole side of your website itself. There's more than just captioning and audio description. That's a little more video centric, but your websites, that gets into, are they screen reader friendly? Do they have the right, color contrast for people with, accessibility needs? Are the images described with alt text? All this kind of stuff is core to that WCAG. And there's a number of solutions out there. There are companies like Accessibility and Userway. offer kind of a quick fix where you subscribe to their widget, you pop it in your website, and you're quote unquote compliant. Now, whether the accessibility community loves that compared to going through your website carefully and really addressing everything in a native fashion, I think that's up for debate. But if you need to get a quick solution, like you're up on one of these deadlines and you haven't already started exploring this, you should look at one of those widget-based solutions. It's a fast way to go, and you could always, grow from there. And I believe MassAccess may have been using or still using one of those widget-based solutions on their site, and you may see the little accessibility icon like on a site in the corner, pop that up, and you get a whole bunch of additional options. We talked about some of the ASL stuff as well. So in kind of like captioning, as we think about audio description as well, it's important to think about, there are multiple workflow entry points for all this. You could be working in your nonlinear editor, and maybe Adobe Premiere has plugins and solutions to do your CC and your AD right there. And you think about, well, that might be good for me. Or your live production could handle the live captioning side. We talked about playout can be a good centralized point. Each online video platform may be doing their own thing. Social media. So bottom line, it can be dizzying, and kind of a key takeaway, something to think about is try to centralize. Like wherever you can centralize and have that thing cover more of these other points, you're just going to streamline and save a lot of time. Even though right now, especially in like audio description, it's not necessarily clear because all these tools don't always have the hooks for that. So think about centralizing your workflow. And we talked about another tip here, think about sponsorship and other monetization opportunities. So that could be spots, you put up a graphic in between shows and say captioning for this program sponsored by, and that's an opportunity to go sell sponsorship. Or on the streaming side, audio description brought to you by, and you could add maybe a video pre-roll. Just like YouTube has ads before you watch a content, you could have a pre-roll ad, and that's something you could go sell. Actually, not just sponsorship, but full up advertising on the streaming side. So if you're looking for a way to offset cost, this is something to explore as well. You can maybe find a way to turn it into a revenue generator. I think with that, I want to make sure there's time, and I'm going to conclude and pass it over to Matt. Maybe we just see if there are a few quick questions. Okay, if none came in, I will.
There is one question here by
Okay.
Kat. Let me just read that really quick. It can become quite expensive for AD when a center has very lengthy and regularly scheduled meetings at permanent costing. Do you see the costs coming down at all? Possibly only for minutes, actually, where AD happens for a full meeting minutes.
Yeah, I think, just chime in. I definitely think costs will come down over time, like we saw with captioning. Other things that can also help, some providers do offer, kind of volume purchases, and they'll give some really nice discounting in volume, which also can help for budgeting because, sometimes it's easier. You could go, do the math and say, all right, it's roughly this many, hours per year, but let me, kind of map that out to a 5-year bundle. I could get better pricing, and I've taken care of my budget without having to worry about it again.
Jesse, one other question about this though too is the production turnaround times for VOD, because that may pose a problem as well. If
Right.
if the cultural
Yeah.
expectation is that the VOD goes on tomorrow morning right after the meeting, that may not be the case if you're waiting for files to come back,
Correct.
right?
That's a great point. And actually, that was another area I was doing some research. It kind of seems like the suggested practice or the expectation is that audio description should be available when you first post that file. I say should, okay, which takes a little, could be challenging, right?
But I think this gets into this effective communications issue.
Mhm.
If it takes days for you to post what
Right.
should be coming up almost, immediately or
Immediately.
the
Right.
next day for community expectations, it may not be a reasonable accommodation.
True. Yeah, that's a fair point.
It actually would
So,
change the service.
right.
And I think this is the thing we've got to be thinking about is we think about like building the most effective services for the community rather than thinking about this is what the law tells me to do.
Right. Yeah, that's a fair point. I think that's a strong argument there. But generally turnaround times they can vary greatly across services. Just from what I've seen, they can be very lengthy. It's also interesting. So one of the big determining factors is how much is being described too, right? So I mean, a lot of from our experience and Teleview, we've been developing our own audio description service that we just recently launched. So we've looked at this a lot, and I know some of the other playout vendors have as well. But so you may have a government meeting, and it could be a 3 hour long meeting, but at the end of the day, there's really only 30 different spots to put something in because people don't come up for air all that much, right? And then you may have some other content where there just isn't a lot of dialogue at all, and all of a sudden you have an opportunity to go wild with your descriptions. So how much you're actually describing, because one of the main bottlenecks is the vision AI, right? Trying to get the vision AI to understand and quote unquote watch. That can be time consuming. So there's a lot of different approaches out there, and I think what you're going to see is there's going to be just a big difference between services. I'm trying to think of some examples like we've seen a 10-minute file can take as long as 3 minutes to describe. And again, I'm speaking a little bit more from experience, the way we've chosen to architect things. So there can be nuances. And then I've seen, and heard about other cases where you could have a long meeting that is taking a half a day or something like that. So big variation out there. But I think if you look, I think you can find solutions that, do a really good job where it's high quality, but also fast turnaround. Okay, great. Why don't we turn it over to Matt?
Great. Let me just full presentation. All right, I'm going to talk more about how we're approaching it for actually implementation here at Public Media Network and some of the steps that we're taking. Full disclosure, we're a Teleview customer and we've started testing their audio description as well, but we've been testing some other services. Also, so this is part of what I've gone through recently with my board, and I recommend that you share and have these discussions with your board of directors as well. And we made it clear that the board is the one that needs to determine any undue burden more than me as an executive director making that determination. So our captioning we've been doing for a number of years now on all of our on-demand and live streams. So we're continuing that practice. Audio description we're looking on, and then the other piece that we have to look at is that we're distributing about 85 to 100 hours of new content per month. And that includes government meetings and original programs and public access programming. We did make a determination that we feel our public access programming needs to be covered by this, one, philosophically, but two, also because, one, we're a quasi-governmental organization, but two, even if we weren't, if we were a nonprofit, we would be contracted by the local governments, who are the ones who give the authority to us to provide public education and government access services. So the determination that our board made in discussing that was those are government services, regardless of how we're classified. And so we should be looking at how we incorporate closed captioning and audio description across all that we do, both for compliance and for what we do. So we're looking at our live government meetings, our archived meetings that we make available on demand, our programming, independent programming posted to us by our third parties. And then if we bring in any distributed programming from other providers like Democracy Now! Or others, we have to look at, is that audio described? If there's anything we make available on demand, because most of that we just do live on the channels. We're not concerned as much with audio description there, based on what both Jesse and Mike have said as well. We kind of determine the live streams until we get a request from somebody saying that they need audio description on it. We're approaching it as not needing audio description. And then all of our social media video content needs to have closed captioning and audio description on it as well. We are kind of unique in that we kind of fall under both compliance deadlines. So as a quasi-governmental organization, we're considered a special district. So we fall under the April 26, 2027 deadline. But we also work with a number of municipalities as partners who are larger. So we're kind of doing a phased approach here where we're prioritizing the programming and work that we're doing for the city of Kalamazoo and Kalamazoo County, Road Commission of Kalamazoo County, that fall under the earlier deadline to help them with their compliance, and then phasing in the rest of it as we go. So we have set an internal goal to be fully compliant across all of what we do by January 1st of 2027. So we're well ahead of the April deadline. I think we'll be able to meet that without a problem, other than looking at where we're going to raise revenue to cover some of the costs. But we're going to eat the costs until we do is what our board decided. And the fact, although it's a large price tag in analyzing where we spend money and how we spend money, the board didn't feel like we could make a strong argument that it's an undue burden, because we can make other choices of what not to provide to the community to provide this. So really, in the first cost we were looking at about $1 per minute for audio description, we're preparing in our budget, or have been preparing, about $72,000 for an annual cost to provide audio description. Although Telview's offering is going to be lower than the one we were looking at, so we're going to be able to find a different type of cost savings. But this was a couple months ago. Looking at 3Play Media is about $1.10 per minute to do AI audio description. We are starting discussions at the same time with all of our municipal partners about how we're funded by them. We just receive a percentage of the franchise fees in the way that our urban cooperation agreement is structured. So we're receiving less money every year from them. So we've started those discussions around that. We have new compliance requirements to meet. There's added costs. And so we need to start reevaluating, in addition to just the structural decline we've had, how we're going to provide these services for you as we move forward. So kind of the phased approach that we've been looking at here is we started working on implementing audio description for those city meetings and county meetings, and working on the workflow. We post them on our YouTube channel, our on-demand through Telview. But the city, for instance, also posts the meetings onto their YouTube channel. So we're working on the workflow where we'll have a shared folder that we take the audio description file into, and then they'll pull those audio description files and add them themselves to their YouTube programs. And it's a really weird place to find it in YouTube to do it. Took us a while. Even the resources online is not helpful when you try to follow their guidelines of how to add audio description. But we finally found where to do it under languages. And you can add in, at least on our channel now, you can add in audio description. It's labeled as audio description as another audio file. And then we're going to maintain strict captioning compliance. With the idea of the captioning too, we've started testing some workflows of additional review over closed captioning for accuracy of spelling of names of some of our municipalities or people or companies, and the fact that the language models are great and hit it most of the time. But for instance, one of our communities is Oshtemo Township, but even most of the commissioners pronounce it as Oshmo, right? And so the AI is never going to pick up that it's Oshtemo. It always comes in as Oshmo Township or Oshmo Fire Chief, and it's, so we've started to work on what is the amount of time that it takes for us to go in and quickly review and make some of those corrections. We haven't determined if we're going to keep doing that. That's part of what we're doing as part of our cost analysis to see what the burden is, if we do it on our own or we wait to see if somebody asks for that to be taken care of. We've been auditing the external platforms. YouTube is all set now, and we're developing standard operation procedures around, like, do we want to add narrations on all of our logo screens, that automatically just takes care of some of that, so we don't have to worry about it getting picked up in the audio description. We have started working on new standards for our social videos, and I'll cover those in a minute. So as I said, with captioning, we've been doing 24/7 live captioning on 5 channels. We have a mix of programming types, live and pre-recorded. We've fully automated those captioning workflows through the system. Those all display on our cable channels, on live streams, on Telview. video on demand or OTT and mobile apps. And then we also automatically upload those captions with the files over to YouTube. We just think it's better to keep the captioning consistent across the platforms rather than letting YouTube then regenerate captions and then us potentially have to review those as well. Audio description, what we send is as Jesse mentioned, we've tested standard audio description. We've used 3Play, which we have to download it, extract the audio file, upload it there, run the stuff, download the file, re-upload it to our on-demand platforms. The processing time has varied greatly as we've done it, and it's not always consistent. So sometimes it's quicker, sometimes it's slower. I have a 2-hour meeting. Usually they're done within 4 hours. That's been running for over 22 hours right now on their platform. I'm not sure what the hang up is on that file today, but and then I ran that one through TelView a little while ago, and it was, within less than an hour it was processed. So, it's very, the question of having it immediately, we've decided we're going to add for now onto our website a description that says audio description should be available within X number of hours of the content being posted. We'll go longer than what we expect. So within 24 to 48 hours is most likely what we're going to say. That's why we've been testing it. We feel the upfront communication should help to mitigate people saying, hey, you haven't audio described your files yet. And that'll allow us still to get information out quickly to people who want it right away. And then as soon as we can get the audio description there, it'll be there, and we're kind of working. That's why we're testing workflows, so we can kind of know what is the extreme we're going to run into and how do we prioritize this in our workflow. We have decided, and in working with our municipal partners at the city of Kalamazoo, not to do extended audio description on all programs right now, while we look at a planning commission meeting and feel that those meetings would most benefit from an extended audio description, because there's rarely time for the slides to be described, and presenters rarely describe the slides well. We are going to go with what's basically needed now, with the goal that we will work towards improvement over time, and then address that if we get a request, for a more complete audio description. Then we'll run it specially through to get an extended audio description of that. The thing to remember when you do an extended audio description file, what we realize is, and then we also have to upload that full file with the audio description because it's going to pause the video, and then we have to recaption that file as well with closed captioning. So there's an additional workflow, and that's the other reason we decided not to start doing extended audio description on everything, because it does start to add costs, up significantly as we go. So as costs come down, we'll continue to reevaluate, and we'll see, but we definitely know we have the system set up if we do get a request to do so. And then internally, we've started since beginning of March, pushing that, making sure that we have open captions on all of our social videos, so we don't have to worry if the platforms are closed captioning them or add captions to them. It's a practice for social videos and reels anyway, that most people listen to those platforms often without sound. So we started work then, and we're also looking at incorporating descriptive scripting into our public service content that we do that way. So we're describing in a way what it is, kind of think if we're doing radio with video, and find a way that we can make sure all the information is conveyed. As we do it, we've been working to make sure everything has alt text on it. AI platforms are great too. If you're unsure how to describe an image, to just throw it into an AI tool and say, please give me an alt text description for this image. They've been working pretty well when we're doing it. And then we've been working with our partners and with others, because they like to stream on other platforms, to ensure that there's closed caption streaming on any content that they want restreamed onto their Facebook or their YouTube, that settings are on. And if it's not capable of doing it where they want to, that, we won't provide the support for that service. Moving forward, just to protect ourselves as well. And then with our websites, while we are using a widget, we are working to make everything internally working without an overlay widget. So we've been operating 2 platforms, one for content and one for our website. We're going to consolidate them due to cost to maintain and take care of 2 websites and worry about it back into one that way. and then working to expand all of our workflows. And then the other big piece that we're looking at is really to become the expert in the area on audio description and closed captioning and what to do. So even in proposals, we've been working on around branded content with partners. We've already started writing in that we provide audio description and closed captioning as a service, so you're fully compliant with ADA. We are working on training materials and plan to hold training sessions or put together an online training program for all of our municipal partners, so the planners and other people can have training materials or go through training to learn how to better describe their slides. We know that we won't be able to get all of them to do it because you can't always even get them to produce a nice looking slide, but we're working to have those materials to be that expert in the area, and to help them achieve that. And then also that we could have a resource they can point to with some online tutorials for public speakers or anyone else giving a presentation to them, that they could say, you're giving a presentation, please refer to this material on how to best describe your slides. It helps them to show that they're making steps to try to make the programming as accessible as possible in the meeting content. Whether people follow through on it or not, that's what we have the backup for, with audio description to go. And so then kind of the last phase of what we're doing will be October through December this year of putting across all of our municipal and government content. And then we're going to also have training for our producers, public access producers, on how to do audio description, how to, do things well in their programming, what those requirements, workflows are. We'll be completing all of our compliance audits to make sure all of our PDF files we use or put out are compliant. Any forms we use for online submissions are compliant. That's kind of the stuff that we tend to not think about too, is, if we're putting out a PDF document of our policies and procedures, are they compliant with accessibility standards and readers and everything else? So we'll be testing and checking all of that so that we meet that by then. So there's kind of I don't have examples pulled up. I started digging for some at the last minute to show some of it. What I'll do is I'll add to this some links to both an extended audio description file and then some to just regular audio description that we've been doing, so that people can kind of look at those, because it's kind of hard to find the exact moment in the different meetings where the audio description pops in as I was kind of scanning through, and you might have to listen to like 5 minutes of the meeting just talking before you hit that audio. But what we're hearing is it's simple things, like it'll say, waterfall, on the screen, Comstock Township, text, meeting will start, shortly. And then with a lower third ID, it'll say text on the screen, Comstock Township, April 1st, 2026, and then you'll hear things like 3 people sit at a dais, person approaches the podium, and then is he, for the basic parts of the different meetings. And then it can definitely get a lot more extended audio description. We tested a file. I'll share a link to that one, because we with 3Play, we tested one that was a very artistic production of dancers wearing chainmail dresses and stuff. So the type of description that goes into it could do when you do audio description. We have not run a meeting through because at the cost, I didn't want to pay for a planning commission meeting to, see, they comped us the one to test the service. So I haven't run another one through to save cost, but that's kind of some of the pieces that we're working on and how we're putting it together. But, I'll just reiterate what Mike said. Philosophically, we've taken the approach that part of our role is to make information and the cultural life of the community and everything as accessible to people as possible and to help them to connect and communicate. And so while we're required to do this, we actually feel it's the right thing to do as well. So we're prioritizing support. We are building a sponsorship package that we're going to try to find sponsors, to help offset some of the costs. Our next donor appeal letter that's going out, we're going to write in about how we are, not that we're required to, but how we are working to make, content accessible to all of our community, so that they can fully engage in civic life. And the cost at this, if you donate, will help to cover those costs. So we're building in there too. We think we're going to get support as we talk. If we talk to people in our community, people are really excited about the fact that we're starting to offer this service, whether they ever use it or not. And I will say from the use of closed captioning and the extra features like agenda indexing, we have received a lot of positive feedback about government meetings being fully indexed that people can run through and quickly find what they need and search for it. And love the fact they can just go to this chapter point and see this and understand what was going on there. And then we use that also to repurpose and help report on what occurred at meetings. So there's a lot of great tools that you can further for further engagement in the community as a result. So we're looking at how we fully maximize the investment of cost to also further provide information.
Great.
And then I guess
Thanks so much, Matt. And
question.
yeah, let's see if there are questions.
It looks like Tom asked roughly how much was the cost of the hardware and install? I think that's specifically to you, Matt.
Oh yeah, I'll have to look up the cost for the hardware in the install. We installed a number of years ago, and because we went through a full analysis with municipal captioning of all the different systems out there, and because we have 5 cable channels that we then stream live, and then all the programming we do, it was most cost effective for us to work with Telview on that. But I'll have to pull up those costs. I can get those to you if somebody wants. I'll drop my contact information in the chat.
And the thing you're describing, Matt, I think is super important for folks. It's not going to be like a one cost, one size fits all solution. A lot of it depend on your clients, your communities you're serving, your workflows, and you've got to really be thinking that through as you're doing your planning.
Yeah, I will say, with 3Play to test them, we had to put in an upfront. We had to pay for so much time upfront just to be able to be set up in the system. And so, it was for 3Play, it was we had to do $1,000 up front. So right now, anything we're running through with them is just chipping away at that. We could have bought much more time up front, but we were holding our fingers crossed that our partners like Telview would have a better option that's more fully integrated. So we don't want to take our full year what we're thinking. I will say be careful too, because or there are companies like in 3Play 2, whatever you pay up front has to be used within 12 months. And so we're also cautious to not want to throw a whole number up and then find out it's not really running what we thought, and especially with the phased approach. So we took the approach to pay a little bit more. It was only going to save us 5-10 cents per minute, to pay a large sum up front. So for us, it made sense to do that and start to see what the costs were really going to run as we run meetings through. And then we've learned things even in the process, right? So the first meetings, we didn't trim at all. We just put them up there, and then we're like, we just paid for 5 minutes of audio description on the room before the meeting actually started because they started late, right? So we're working on those workflows. Even with Telview, we're going to be working on that to say, all right, we need to trim this down before that occurs so that when we put it up there, it'll actually be less minutes that are being processed, before
You're giving me a feature idea, Matt. We need to put in auto detection of freeze frame and trim it for you.
Yeah, that is
We'll think about
perfect. Yeah, there we go. We'll talk about that. But that's what we're learning through the process, and that's why we're trying to be a little ahead, so we're not caught trying to figure some of this stuff out at the last minute, and just getting the team and the workflow, and a different team member, the person who handles distribution to be thinking about, okay, I have to now make sure we have audio description on this, and then I have to get this up over to YouTube, and what amount of time is that going to take for us to do, and how do we do it? So, I recommend trying to get started, even if you're only going to do a few things. If your deadline's in a year, I recommend trying to get started sooner than later, even if you just use an off service for a little while to just test a few things and see how it works.
Well, we've already gotten a lot of feedback that this has been a really, really great session, and so much so that multiple people have requested that we share the video and share slides after. So I'll probably follow up with you and see the best way that we can kind of share those with everybody, both MassAccess folks and also the ACM members that are here too.
I mean, so either people can reach out to us individually, or if you prefer to have all the materials together, Matt, whatever's easiest for you all. But I know, we're all approachable. So yeah.
And I think that looks like that's it for the questions right now. Does that seem right? I think it is.
Great. Well, thanks, Matt. Thanks so much for coordinating, and thanks to MassAccess for hosting. And also big thanks to our guests, Mike and Matt jumping in. Really, really appreciate it. And to our ACM guests who joined. So, yeah, and I think absolutely you could reach out to any of us individually, and maybe it makes sense. We could try to, centralize those slide presentations and make them available.
Yeah, I think that's great. We'll definitely try to do that. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Telview, for sponsoring this webinar. For those MassAccess folks that are here, I just shared a link to a feedback form if you want to take a second to fill that out. Just a little feedback about this session, and if there's anything you would request for future webinars that we can coordinate. Thank you very much, everyone.